Hi, I'm David.
And I'm Nina.
Welcome to the Charitable Trust Unit of the New Hampshire Department of Justice. Today, we're going to talk about preventing fraud.
Yes, everyone loves to hear about fraud, but nobody wants to be a victim.
And any charity, large or small, stands a good chance of being a victim of fraud.
Well, actually, David, most often it's the smaller charities, like a sports league, that have a higher risk of being a victim of fraud because their board of directors have not adopted proper internal controls.
Okay, Nina, so before we go any further, what is fraud?
Well, fraud is simply cheating another person through falsehood or deception. Embezzlement is a specific type of fraud where you take money that has been entrusted to you and you make it your own.
So, stealing. You're really talking about stealing a charity's money.
Exactly. In the charitable world, embezzlement is the most common type of fraud, but our recommendations today apply to all types of fraud.
So, if you were to make one recommendation to prevent fraud, what would that be?
The most important thing is having a board that understands its responsibility to safeguard its charitable assets. Also understanding that fraud can happen to any organization, and each board member has a fiduciary duty to prevent fraud.
A fiduciary duty?
Don't worry, we're not going to go into that here. Just know that you have a legal duty to act in the best interest of your organization and to act carefully with your organization's assets. That means not doing something completely irresponsibly, like signing a blank check. For more information, please see our video on fiduciary duties.
Okay, so a charity board members have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the organization by preventing fraud. How would they go about fulfilling that duty?
Well, since the board is responsible for choosing the person who has control of the money, they should be aggressive and vigilant in executing that duty. Also, they must monitor the person that they choose. Typically, there are 3 factors that are indicative of the likelihood of fraud in an organization. The 3 factors are the person's integrity, the opportunity to commit fraud, and the pressure on the person.
So what should a board do?
To reduce fraud, a board must first choose a person with integrity who isn't likely to commit fraud. Second, try to reduce the opportunity to commit fraud through internal controls. You can't always tell who will commit fraud. Many of the offenders our unit has dealt with in its decades of experience were respected individuals with no record. We've seen people in law enforcement, accountants, and other professionals commit fraud. Even though they were people the groups thought they could trust, they embezzled. Oversight of the individual is key. We have a phrase in our office: trust, but verify.
What should a board be thinking about whenever choosing that person? I mean, should a board be running background checks whenever somebody wants to become treasurer? That sounds pretty extreme.
Well, the key thing for the board to know is that they, the board members, are ultimately responsible for the person that they choose to be in possession of the charity's money.
But, so if they're not running a background check, what should a board do?
Just ask the person. If the person was convicted of a felony, you should find out more. If the person admits to having embezzled another charity's money, hiring them to control your money may be a breach of your fiduciary duties. Believe it or not, our unit has seen this happen over the years.
Okay, so the board has a duty to protect the charity's assets, and they go about doing that through oversight of the person who has possession of the money. But what is a board actually doing for oversight?
Oversight verifies the work of the person who is in possession of the money. Since a board has a legal right to bank records as well as check images, the person who has been entrusted with the check writing powers must be able to produce reconciled bank statements within 24 hours. If the board makes a request and the person gets defensive and says, "What, don't you trust me?" you may have something to worry about. The treasurer should attend all board meetings and should give monthly reports on the financial position of the organization. The board should review budgets and watch the spending of the treasurer. Finally, the bank statement should be mailed to a person other than the treasurer. A great way to do that is to have a P.O. box with only 2 people having control of the box.
Those controls sound like they're focused on how the treasurer does their job. What else should the board be concerned with?
Another major source of fraud is cash. If a person steals money before it's deposited, then there's no paper trail or budget to track. Cash controls are especially important for organizations that handle a lot of money, like a sports league. An example of a weak cash control would be where one person volunteers to be both the treasurer and the person who handles the concession money.
So what would be proper internal controls for cash?
For cash, there are 3 main forms of oversight that an organization should have. First, the person who has the power to write checks should never be the person who makes deposits. Second, there should usually be 2 people counting cash after an event and making deposits. Third, you should have a paper trail from an event to the bank with signatures, verifying how much money was given to each person en route to the bank. Those are the most important things for the handling of cash, but if someone wants more tips, the Charitable Trust Unit has an entire article on fraud prevention which can be found on our website.
So, after the board has selected someone, they have oversight of the treasurer, and they have internal controls for cash. Is there anything else a board should be doing?
Yes, the last place a lot of fraud occurs is with fraudulent expenses. While a treasurer may be giving out accurate and limited checks, the amounts of reimbursement should only be for items for the organization, not personal expenses, and a treasurer should never sign blank checks.
So, what should a treasurer be looking for there?
Expense fraud is either done by employees or by outside organizations faking or increasing bills. Before paying a bill, the treasurer should, at a minimum, see the invoice of the amount of the bill. For employee reimbursements, the treasurer should examine the receipt before paying the full amount to ensure it's only for business expenses. Finally, whenever possible, the treasurer should verify invoices and bills through physical inspection to make sure everything is in order.
So, actually checking to make sure the items were delivered whenever possible.
Exactly.
So, with the cash being verified before it's deposited, the board watching over the treasurer, and the treasurer watching over expenses, will doing all of that prevent fraud?
The reality is, if someone really wants to commit fraud, it can be extremely difficult to detect. Adopting internal controls don't guarantee fraud prevention, but they do create an environment where it's much less likely to happen.
Well, that's a lot of ideas for a charity to implement. Thanks for going into all that detail, Nina.
Thanks for listening.
And do you have any other resources for our watchers?
Absolutely. The Association of Certified Fraud Examiners issues this report every 2 years on fraud prevalence in the United States. It's a detailed analysis of fraud prevention techniques and their effectiveness. Also, this book, Preventing Fraud in Nonprofit Organizations, is specific to the nonprofit sector, and it outlines all of the ways in which individuals commit fraud, as well as internal controls to prevent them. Also, if our watchers would like more resources, please contact our office.
Well, that about wraps it up here at the Charitable Trust Unit. We hope you enjoyed our discussion on fraud prevention and got some ideas to implement.